All right, so this video comes to you talking about combine results and interpretation from a collaboration that I did with Mokabla and the Toronto Basketball Club. And this happened last year at one of their basketball tournaments, plus combines, which we created. But the idea to gather data on the South Asian population and mainly athletes started a couple years ago with the conversation with Gautam Kapoor, who is one of the co-founders of Brown Ballers, along with Naveen. And we got connected via Neha at South Asians in Sport. We've had really, really good conversations. And, funnily enough, he was working at NBA Global in New York City at the time when my former supervisor, Andrew Murray, who was the director of performance at the University of Oregon, so we had that connection there even before we got a chance to connect and collaborate. So Gautam asked me, he's like, hey, what data is there out there that's actually collected, interpreted, and potentially published, whether it's published through a research journal or not? There has to be something out there that looks at fitness characteristics of South Asian athletes, regardless of age. And generally, we're going to find it, we were hoping to find it in athletes that are in around my age generation and younger. Because anything older, there's really not going to be much out there. And I tried to do a lit review. I connected with as many long-term athlete development researchers, coaches around the globe because I'm very well connected. And I know everybody knows me, and we couldn't find anything. And to me, that was, two things. One, it was a big red flag and a big question mark to why. The second, it was just very disappointing and disheartening because on the global scale, South Asians have not really made a name for themselves in terms of athletic achievements and feats. When the Winter and Summer Olympics come around, every 4 year cycle for each of those, we are generally at the bottom in terms of medals collected. There are certain sports which we do well at, and a lot of it really has to do with support from the government, who is actually identifying and developing talent in these different areas all across the globe, especially in the South Asian regions, and providing them with the coaching and support because you just can't expect somebody to just flip a light switch on and develop a significant amount of talent in one sport and dominate globally. It doesn't happen like that. You know, Nobody knows that better than me coming from the NFL, having worked with some of the best athletes on the planet, not just the NFL, NBA, elite college sports, USATF, Olympians across the globe. So we couldn't find anything. And Brown Ballers host camps, all over Canada, all over the country. They have their semi-pro team, which has been amazing. They won their first game, a few years ago. Gautam did a TED Talk, which is amazing, something I'm hopefully looking to do here in the near future, just with all the knowledge and data that I have that nobody else has. So, we were trying to collaborate with putting together a way to assess the fitness levels of these athletes, and mainly, at a basketball camp. Basketball is a great sport, love it. Played it myself when I was younger, worked with a lot of high level elite basketball programs and NBA athletes and multiple NBA finals champions. And I said, look, let's create something which the athletes would really, really enjoy doing. We could gather data and then we can look at it, interpret it, and compare it to what's already out there because basketball has a good amount of information out there, especially at the youth level. Not necessarily coming from the NBA, but in and around the elite college level age and younger, we can compare what do the South Asian athletes look like and how do we stack up? What are we good at? What are we not as good at? And what can we do to help them compete at that level to get the athletes over the hump to potentially have a star basketball player that can hopefully rise through the ranks and play in the NBA and not just, one of these one-offs that, oh, I was there, but I wasn't able to dominate. Oh, I was 7 foot and 300 pounds, but that was about it. Most people that are 7 foot, 300 pounds are going to get an opportunity at least play just because height rules all when it comes to the sport of basketball. So, timing wise was difficult, me being a new parent and trying to coordinate things with the Brown Ballers. We never got that opportunity to, but, had a great intro meeting with Ansh and Karthik of Mokabla. They followed me for a while, know my story, kind of know my aims and what I'm trying to do. And, we talked through some of the stuff, and they just to share, like, this is who we are, this is our community. There are so many people that are involved, want to get involved, that want to continue to learn and grow. And I thought, hey, this is a great opportunity. This is what we tried to do with Brown. This is what I try to do with Brown Ballers. Let's try to do it with your group. So they were all in. They're like, hey, we have plenty of volunteers. We don't, to accomplish this, we didn't need a ton of equipment. We didn't need to spend a ton of money. It was very, very simple and very easy. So we put together, well, I kind of spec'd it out and shared with them, and they executed. They did a phenomenal job executing that. I wasn't there on site, unfortunately. Hopefully, they're going to be doing one here in the States, maybe in Dallas. I'll definitely make sure that if the timing is right and we're not on a family trip, I'm going to make my presence there known, because I want to support them, and I want to continue doing what we've already started to do, which is gather data on our population that nobody else has even tried to do, and interpret it appropriately in a way that nobody else would even think, even if they had the data. So to go along with capturing data, I wanted to understand two main things. And I've done this in college sports. I've done this in the NFL. I've done this with elite athlete programs I'm consulted with. I want to learn more about the habits of the individual athletes, and I want to know about their knowledge, and not just nutrition knowledge. I want to know about it in all the variety of different areas that impact athlete health and performance. And because these athletes are younger, they live at home, they're high school age. They're not off on their own, taking care of themselves. Their parents are going to be heavily involved with coordinating their care, getting them access to training, taking them where they need to go. If they don't have a car, buying food for them, making food for them, getting supplements, whatever it is. So I created a survey and questionnaire that was administered to both the athletes and the parents. So we got a decent response, continuing to refine it, gather more data, continue to interpret it. But for right now, we've got a good set of data that we've been able to look at and come up with solutions and strategies for, why are we the way that we are. So again, this is just talking about what we found. So before I start going through what we found from the fitness testing, the combine results, knowing what I do know, my hypothesis was, when we're looking at these athletes, they are going to be shorter and smaller in stature. In terms of power output, it's going to be lower. In terms of top speed, it's going to be lower. In terms of aerobic capacity, it's going to be lower. In terms of muscular endurance, it's going to be on average or lower. And then in terms of, I think that's pretty much covering everything that we found. Oh, agility. I said agility was going to be pretty good, just because of the size and anthropometrics and what that means when it comes to assessing agility tests and markers. And I'll explain why as we continue to go through. So we have 56 athletes participate in the combine, grade 7 through 12, all from a South Asian background. So it's, again, unique and specific to us. So what did we find out? Let me click through. Okay, big picture snapshot. They all play basketball. Everybody's predominantly South Asian, grade 7 through 12, ages 12 to 18. So pretty much middle school, high school age. And what we found, in general, this is a headline story, they were shorter and lighter than typical U.S. basketball cohorts of the same age. Agility was surprisingly solid on the top end. The best athletes near pro agility benchmarks. Linear speed and vertical jump, group average was lower. You're always going to get outliers. The same that we find with size, strength, fitness, when you have 1.5 billion people within the diaspora across the globe, you're going to get outliers. And I recognize that when we're talking about averages, that's generally what we want to look at, because not everybody's going to end up being an outlier. Upper body and trunk endurance, push-ups and curl-ups were respectable to very good, which is good. That kind of exceeded my expectations. Aerobic fitness and flexibility, they did the pacer test, and the sit and reach were weak points versus age-matched norms, which that was a part of my hypothesis. So this is what we would want to know about and what we'd expect from a community that has skill and talent, that wants to get better, but hasn't integrated structured training and pushing our kids to get more involved in sport and fitness, as opposed to, again, what's common? It's academics, family, and strong work ethic to support both of those things. And maybe you might get a chance to, recreationally play a sport, but it's probably more for the socialization of it than, hey, can I actually develop talent, and can my kid play, not only in high school, but in college? Could my kid potentially be a professional athlete and inspire millions of others? You know, so our group has not had structured training, elite coaching, or any kind of performance developmental system behind it across the globe. So this is the first data set of its kind. As I told you before, we tried to find things out there. There's really nothing. Nothing readily accessible or easily accessible. There's probably something out there, but it's hidden behind, you know, somebody's firewall. It's something that's been written down but not put into text and available out there on the web. And this is the first specifically for basketball. Not only basketball, but potentially across the globe for any South Asian sport. So when we look at everything as a whole, you have our outliers. So with the outliers, these top performers show that the ceiling is real and the group averages show where we actually are and where we need to focus all of the identification and development of what these kids need. So looking at anthropometrics, height, weight, reach, and grip strength. So mean height, 5'4", mean weight, 113 pounds, and then you get the ranges. Standard reach, 88.8, and that's standing reach, not wingspan. Mean grip strength, 71.5 pounds. Max is 113, which is pretty good, but 71.5 is pretty low. So looking at height, average 15-year-old U.S. boys or about 3 inches taller. The average U.S. adult man is 5'9". The average South Asian adult man is 5'5". Group mean sits closer to the averages for South Asians than what you'd expect in the U.S. And again, you can't do anything about that. That's what we would already expect. So definitely make sure your kids eat. If they are not vegetarian, make sure they get plenty of animal food. They get plenty of protein. They get plenty of quality carbohydrates, micronutrients, feed them dairy, whatever you need to do. That's very, very important for height development. I promise you that. So again, you give up 3 inches versus U.S. aged, say, similar age boys, and then 5 inches versus elite youth basketball players of the same age. Because again, if you're elite, you're the outliers of the outliers, and you're going to be able to get pushed into that group because you're just better than everybody else. So wingspan and reach is proportionate to height, which is pretty comparable, but the main limitation is absolute height. So absolute wingspan and reach is going to be lower than these other groups that are proportionate to their height, because their heights are taller, so the wingspans are longer. And wingspan and height is a big deal in basketball. If you want to learn more about genetics and what that ends up meaning, here's a book that I picked up, well over 10 years ago when I was at Oregon that changed my mind frame of a lot of things, called The Sports Gene by Malcolm Gladwell. Or David Epstein, my bad. Not Malcolm Gladwell. They're friends. But brilliant book. I actually posted about it on Twitter, and David Epstein quote tweeted me and was very appreciative of me giving him a shout out. And then grip strength, solid for the age range, consistent with decent push-up and curl-up performance. So again, those were probably the biggest bright spots. Curl-up performance for sure, push-up performance, mean grip strength, and agility. But everything else was subpar. And it just shows that, look, this is where we are, and this is what we need to identify and develop and get better at. Speed and agility, we did a lane agility drill, which is very common in the NBA Combine, and then a 3/4 court sprint. So basically just straight linear sprint. So for the lane agility drill, 12.08 seconds was the group mean. Best performer was 11 seconds, which is really, really good. NBA Combine average by position. And again, these guys are taller, so agility is going to be a little bit more difficult the taller you are. An NBA guard average, that's not too bad, because these kids going into the NBA have to be at least 1 year removed from high school, so they're going to be in and around 19 years old, 18 to 20 years old. So the age group is greater than what we ended up looking at in testing. So the top 10 to 15% of the cohort of our kids, generally promising change of direction with their agility, competitive with those numbers. So how can we explain why we are good at agility? So agility is change of direction, and obviously the lower your center of gravity, the lower you can get to the ground, the better off you're going to end up being. So if we end up looking at general anthropometrics and proportions of South Asians, and again, you're going to have outliers. People are not going to always fit this mold, but the majority, we tend to have longer torsos versus lower bodies. So that means that our center of gravity is shortened, and then we have longer femurs versus tibia and fibia. So we look from knee down, that's shorter than knee up. Now, when you want to get into lower positions, and we have, basically longer arms for the most part. especially long forearms. So if you're kind of touching the ground or kind of sinking down low, you're already able to get in those lower positions because of your lower body anthropometrics. We have narrower hips, which means that it's easy to kind of go linearly and side to side versus people that have wider hips. It's not more conducive for agility and top end speed. So uh, that's something that kind of goes in our advantage with our anthropometrics and proportions. So middle of the group developing agility for basketball. So what we would expect, that was a bright spot. Um, it shows that coordination, footwork, and change of direction are not limiting factors for this population. Now, when we look at three-quarter court sprint, so sprint 75% of the court, group mean time was 4.59 seconds. Fastest athlete was 3.75. NBA combine average is much faster. So even our fastest is slower than high school, college guard standards. Which again, it kind of goes with explaining anthropometrics. So if you want to look at the number one measure that's going to correlate to if somebody is explosive or fast, independent of how strong they are, and I've tested and measured thousands of athletes, it is their lower limb length, especially from the knee down, the tibia and fibula. The longer that is, the more, I guess, conducive it is for stride length and generating power vertically through the ground. And you can look at every sprinter from 400 meters and lower. You can look at triple jumpers. You can look at high jumpers. They have long legs, and they have more favorable ratios of their tibia and fibula versus their femurs. Femurs are not as long, and it's something very, very unique. Outside of how high up does that Achilles go? How stiff is it? That's another important thing. But one measure that can definitely correlate with that, and what we find in the South Asian population is we have longer femurs, so that crural index, that femur to tibia fib ratio, is not in our best interest. It kind of works against us. So it's better for agility and, short distances. Stride frequency is a little bit faster, but stride length is what we lack. So, it's definitely one of the biggest reasons why our sprint time is slower. So how can we make up for that? One is just get stronger. So if you can't have the same stride length, well, your stride frequency has to turn over. Your ground contact time has to be lower. So that means you have to become even faster to be able to turn your legs over and over and over and over again. So fastest athlete is still 0.3 to 0.4 seconds off a typical high school varsity player. Group mean 4.6 is the average kid who plays basketball is more like us versus elite basketball prospect. Agility is definitely better than relative speed. Key takeaway is sprint speed is a big gap that we have there, and it is probably the highest leverage physical quality, that and jumping ability, that we would want to try to work on and train. And both are trainable for sure. So that moves on to jumping and explosiveness. So group mean vertical jump 15.5, best performers 33. That's elite level. NBA combine standing vert average is 31. And again, they'll use a vertex, so it's going to end up becoming probably a little bit more accurate, but still, if somebody can jump high, you can tell. You might not have to exactly measure it. Now, if somebody is tall, has long limbs, and can jump high, man, that is something very advantageous and beneficial for basketball. So our group mean is on the lower end. It's well below people that typically are trained to play basketball. General norms, we're lower than adult men, but again, these are not adults. Trained athletes are much higher, almost 9 to 10 plus inches higher. And elite youth basketball is almost 10 inches higher on average. So, our best performer is very good, phenomenal. So, on average, our South Asian athletes have lower, shorter verticals. But for the top performer, again, our outliers are really, really good. Again, vertical jump is a highly trainable quality. You have a proper strength program which integrates plyometrics, you eat well, you rest and recover, over 3 to 4 months, you can get 4 to 8 inches. And again, as long as you can, and again, you have a training effect, but you also have, I'm continuing to grow and get stronger in my own body, that kind of effect too. Now looking at muscular endurance and core, so push-ups, curl-ups, and sit and reach. So we follow the fitness gram um, standard battery of tests because it is validated. There's no messing about. And, push-up was pretty good. 24 reps, right there in the mean. Curl-ups, really, really good. So again, this kind of goes to, do we get the reproducibility? Because our curl-up mean was just, it blows everybody else out of the water. So it's like, okay, did we do this appropriately? Because if we can't reproduce this, then it's like, maybe we have a question mark on how we ended up doing the testing. Sit and reach mean, again, another one where if we reproduced it again, did we get the same kind of results, even maybe within this population? I think these two we want to kind of do again and make sure that we are doing them appropriately. The best push-up result with 50 reps is very good, very, very good. So push-ups were great. Curl-ups, again, we'd have to double check curl-ups and sit and reach just to make sure that they were done appropriately. But if it is true, then we've got good trunk flexor ability. But sit and reach means we have weaknesses in the posterior chain and hamstring, low back tightness, which, truth be told, is pretty common within this population. So mobility and flexibility, strength and power, if these hold true, are big, big weaknesses in top end speed for our group. Now looking at aerobic fitness, we did the pacer test, which is a beep test. You just go back and forth. You have to get into the safe zone before the next beep starts. Next beep starts, you turn around. So basically, you have time starting, and as time continues to progress, the duration between the beeps shortens. So maybe you run down, you get some time to rest before you have to turn around and go, and then it just ends up becoming you're just going steadily. The more laps you can get, the better off you're going to be. So mean laps was 26.7, best performer was 40. We're on the bottom end of the healthy functioning zone. Elite youth basketball athletes can go for days, which is very indicative of somebody playing a significant number of minutes consistently. They have very, very well trained aerobic systems. So again, we are well below athlete norms. We are underdeveloped aerobically. So the key takeaway: aerobic fitness is a clear development opportunity. Strength and power is a clear definite opportunity. Speed and mobility in posterior chain strength too, flexibility. So again, looking at things from a grade specifically, and obviously the older athletes are taller, heavier, and better at sprint, agility, jump outputs, as we would expect because they're just stronger. And they've probably been exposed to some of this stuff a lot more than the younger athletes that haven't had the time to develop and train. And that's completely normal for any population group. Elite basketball kids at different ages, our athletes at different ages, totally fine. What we would expect is those that are in middle school grades 7 through 8, there's more variability because kids just haven't probably developed themselves. They're all over the map with, who's taller and stronger at a younger age, have they hit adolescence and puberty or not, or on the cusp of that. So again, we already know if you're older, you're going to be faster, you're going to be stronger on average. Totally normal. So there is a talent pipeline signal, which is kind of cool. Younger athletes whose outputs already match or beat older peers shows that there is talent there. And if we can cultivate it and hone it and really support it, then man, the sky's the limit for what these athletes could potentially get a chance to do. So obviously with our next step is we want to reproduce these results, going to do another combine. Hopefully we can do something similar here in the States and then build out some age graded adjusted G-scores and percentile tables for each grade group. Your 8th grader score is this, for this specific movement. Obviously we just need more data sets. And being able to reproduce an annual combine allows objective improvement in tracking your baselines, creating published norms, and just showing comparisons, not only within our group, but continue to compare it against, age-matched norms of other backgrounds. And then what are the elite basketball players, here in the United States? How do our athletes compare against them? So again, this just kind of gives us our South Asian athletes versus elite youth norms. Their heights are tall, verticals high, they're faster, lane agility comparable. Anthropometrics, we are shorter and lighter than pretty much everybody else. We lag a little bit on explosive power and speed. Some of our best individuals can compete, but again, they're few and far between. Those are our outliers. Agility is a bright spot. Aerobic capacity, not good enough. Muscular endurance on par. So again, South Asian youth, even with lower average height and historically less access to elite training, show promise in agility and different levels of elite level explosive performance with the metrics that we were able to capture that are specific to basketball. So, strengths, first data set of its kind for South Asian basketball. We know that we've got decent upper body and trunk endurance, above average agility. Some of our athletes can hit high end jump and agility numbers, which is great. Where we have work to do: vertical jump, linear speed, aerobic fitness, flexibility. So we need strength and power development. Build the engine, build the aerobic base, and repeat sprint conditioning. Movement quality, flexibility, especially in the posterior chain. Posterior chain just means your glutes and your hamstrings, everything from the back of the hips downward. So I told you before, we not only had the athletes go through the combine, we sent out surveys, electronically, so they didn't have to do it. This was independent. Specifically to the athlete, specifically to the parents. So we wanted to know knowledge and habits for critical gaps across 56 athletes. Now, not every athlete and parent, ended up providing information. So we've got a much smaller subset of data, but ultimately some data is better than no data, and interpreting it in the appropriate fashion and finding what are some gaps and what are areas of opportunity to help provide value to this group was really, really important, because we don't know what we don't know and they don't know what they don't know. So what the data shows, we asked about nutrition, recovery, supplementation, training, a variety of different things. So it wasn't just one topic. All of these topics are very, very important. And every athlete that wants to perform at a high level, that wants to become elite, needs to hone their knowledge and their habits in all these different areas. Because what we've already shown is we're behind the 8 ball if we compare ourselves to not only elite groups, but kind of the normal US standards of what's already out there. So we have work to do. We have to work even harder now and provide the appropriate amount of support. Well, how do we provide the appropriate amount of support and coaching and resources? We have to figure out, outside of just the fitness characteristics, where are the other gaps? Because it's not just about training and doing stuff on court. It's about nutrition, supplementation, hydration, recovery. So for the athletes, nutrition habits, inconsistent and often poor. They rate their nutrition habits 2 to 3 out of 5, not good enough. A lot of meal skipping, especially breakfast, that's a huge red flag. Very few have meal schedules where you're eating consistently throughout the day. That's a big deal for athletes that want to be successful. Fast food and processed snacks appear regularly. Nutrition knowledge, is low. Protein is understood, but carbs is, a proper substrate is not understood, and that's a big deal. Hydration, another weak area. Many only drink 3 to 4 cups a day. That's very low. So dehydration kind of rears its head. Sleep. These young kids are only getting 6 to 7 hours on average, which is, if you're an adult, that's fine. But if you're a developing kid, that is a big red flag. More gaps. Recovery knowledge is very low. They overestimate ice baths and undervalue sleep. We already saw that here. Training knowledge is mixed. Many believe lifting will make me bulky. That's not true. If you're South Asian of any age across the lifespan, the number one thing you need to be doing is resistance training. Even if you're an athlete. Cultural barriers. Family food culture doesn't match athlete nutrition needs and demands. Supplement knowledge, almost zero. Taking certain things without understanding why. So again, an area of opportunity there. They're not character flaws. They're just failures in the system. Parents might not know. Parents trusting the wrong people. Kids, following the wrong people. So no one has actually properly tried to create education for this group. Plenty do it for younger athletes, but specifically for South Asians, there's nothing out there like that, and that's what I'm working on. So that's one aspect of Blueprint. So again, habits that are kind of good. Most eat 2 to 3 meals, often without structure. That's an issue. Many skip meals. It's an issue. Pre-post training. Nutrition is inconsistent. That's an issue. Fast food and processed snacks appear regularly. It's okay to do it one-off, but regularly is not good enough. Very few think their nutrition supports recovery, that's a big deal and not in a good way. More red flags. Kids are unsure if traditional South Asian foods provide enough nutrients. They can, but if you're an athlete, you kind of need more. You need to do things differently. Several have been told to avoid carbs, which is awful advice. Awful. Multiple think eating less is healthier. You can't do that for this group. Highly inconsistent nutrition, a pretty big risk for low energy availability, and why that's awful for recovery. It delays growth and maturation, and it just breaks you down on the inside. And this is why kids can't grow appropriately or recover. They know protein is important. That's good, but it's not just about protein. So they don't know carbs is the main energy source for basketball. They need to know that. Don't know correct timing for carbs. They need to do that. Don't know how much an athlete should eat versus a non-athlete. They kind of have to have a general idea that athletes need to eat more. Don't know what a proper pregame meal is. Don't know how to properly eat if you're a vegetarian. There's nothing wrong with being a vegetarian. You can be a vegetarian athlete. You just have to be on top of your stuff. So beliefs that must be corrected. Rice, roti, dal, isn't alone enough protein? No. Eating less is healthier? No. Traditional food is sufficient for an athlete? Ideally, no. If we're talking about getting them to the appropriate level to succeed. In terms of hydration, most self-rate a little bit higher than nutrition, but the behaviors don't support this. They drink 3 to 4 cups a day. It's far too low. Electrolytes rarely used. They could benefit from that. During games, majority drink only water. So that's a habit that could potentially be improved. During intense training and during games, anything over an hour, water's not going to be good enough. You need a carbohydrate electrolyte drink, and that's exactly why Gatorade was created. You don't need Gatorade at dinner. You don't need Gatorade at lunch. You need Gatorade at breakfast. You need Gatorade during intense training or something comparable. No understanding of timing before practice or rehydration after sweating. That's something that, I would hope most athletes would be clued in on, even if they are younger. Don't know signs of dehydration. Don't know fluid requirements for their size. Don't know what electrolytes are. Don't know best drinks for long practices. Misconceptions about what electrolytes do. Confusion about dehydration timing signals. We could provide just hydration cheat sheets and protocols and things that are very easy, things that I've used with elite level athletes that can just provide simple education in a way that says, oh, I see this and I read it and things start to make a little bit more sense. Now we look at recovery and sleep. So sleep duration is low. Bedtime, that's pretty late with when they're going to bed and then when they're waking up. Pre-bed routine, a lot of screens, homework, or scrolling. That's going to be constant, not only for these athletes at this age group, but for everybody across the lifespan. A lot of them think stretching is more important than sleep. A lot of them don't need any static stretching. A lot of them need more sleep. Signs of under recovery: I'm always tired, I feel exhausted after practice. When you have poor hydration, poor nutrition, and poor recovery, then the body's going to be constantly, breaking down and not able to build itself back up. And that's what recovery does. It's not that they're out of shape, it's just that they're running on empty. Recovery knowledge gaps: they think stretching is the appropriate tool. It's not. Underused nutrition, sleep, how much to train and when, and warm-ups and cool-downs. They don't think the most effective recovery is nutrition and sleep. They don't time carbs and protein after training. They don't know what happens when recovery is inadequate, and they don't know how to properly build a recovery routine. So again, just teaching them about the proper recovery hierarchy. Now we ask them about training. Most train 5 to 7 days per week, which is what we'd expect. Many do strength training but don't know how. Fewer taught proper warm-ups or cool-down. Warm-ups are more important than cool-downs. Energy levels vary widely. And obviously being an athlete, there's nothing healthy about it. That's the truth about anybody at every level. Sometimes you're just going to have to power through. But if energy levels are constantly low before training, that's a big issue. Big misconception: strength training is CrossFit or High Rocks, or strength training will make you bulky. Unsure if they should lift or if it's bad at their age. Let me clear that up. It's not. And it doesn't mean they have to be lifting like crazy, heavy barbell stuff. No. Body weight stuff, bands, machines, proper manipulation of gymnastics movements. All of that is strength training. That serves to build a base, and then you load it heavier as they show competency and proficiency. Static versus dynamic stretching confused. Knowledge gaps about training: don't know about plyometrics, don't know about proper strength training. How many days should they lift given, like, hey, I'm practicing this many days, I'm playing this many games. Warm up versus stretching. But what do they want to learn? They want to learn proper lifting technique, how to build muscle, how to improve vertical jump, how to train without getting bulky. Newsflash for all these South Asian kids: none of you are going to get bulky. I promise you that. These athletes are motivated and curious. They just haven't been taught the right way to go about doing it, specifically for their bodies and their background. Now, culture and supplements, you know, eating at home, their family food makes it difficult. Don't have enough protein-rich foods at home. Don't know how to eat vegetarian for muscle growth. These vegetarian athletes are unsure if they can build muscle. Some don't feel fully supported at home within their athletic pursuits, and that does make it difficult. I feel for them. Traditional South Asian household foods, what you get is not ideal or conducive for providing what an athlete would need unless you are very intentional about doing it. You're going to have to add on additional things, use specific carbohydrate supplements, use specific protein supplements. You're going to have to supplement with the micronutrients you're not getting in. And that's not just for athletes, that's for South Asians in general. If you watch my other two videos, you kind of already know, like, look, we're at a disadvantage and we can get the results we want. We just have to be intentional and work harder. And when it comes to supplement knowledge, taking protein powder, vitamins, creatine, sometimes caffeine. So it's kind of all over the board. But they don't know why they're taking what they're taking. And they don't know dosing or safety and believe supplements can replace meals. No, that's not what they're there for. The questions they ask: how much is safe? What if I take too many of certain things? Should I take creatine? So there's a massive opportunity to provide foundational supplement education for health, for performance. Now, we look at what did the parents... The parents got the same questions, but it was geared more towards what they think their kids need and what they feel that their kids are doing. So big picture stuff, what the parents believe. They see athletics as important for development, which is great. They believe nutrition is important. They think protein is key. They're willing to support strength and conditioning and structured training, and they're open to more education and resources, which is great. So the open-minded mindset is there. The gap is the knowledge and systems and how to execute this and implement it for their athlete that has the South Asian background. So now we compare what the parents and athletes think and are doing. Parents think we cook at home, include protein, and do okay. Traditional food is probably enough. Athletes feel we don't have enough food, enough protein, or know what to eat before or after games. Parents think kids are getting 8+ hours and encourage sleep. Stretching and cold tubs are big recovery tools. Athletes are reporting much less sleep, later bedtimes, more screens, and they're exhausted after practice. So this is kind of standard for any parent, any child interaction. Parents think one thing, and the reality coming from the kids, if they're honest and transparent, is something that is not on par with what the parents think. So, there is a disconnect there. And the goal is to educate and empower both groups. So really, 6 key gaps: quantity, structure, protein within South Asian food culture. Basically what to eat, when to eat, how much to eat, regardless of if you're vegetarian or not. Understanding hydration, what to hydrate with, when, and how much. Improving everything when it comes to recovery, especially in the form of sleep. Improving sleep quality, sleep consistency, sleep habits, and what to do, if you go through intense training, games, what kind of recovery tactics, self-care techniques are ideal for athletes of this population in this group. Working on improving strength, aerobic fitness, jumping ability, and power and explosiveness, because we've already seen the data that's come out from the combine. So what do we need to focus and work on to complement what they're doing on the court? So the court stuff we're not too terribly worried about. It's working on developing their bodies to improve fitness parameters, but also build up resiliency and durability. Another aspect is just talking about evidence-based supplements. What to take, when to take, and how much, what's appropriate and what's safe, at what level, age level. These are all the gaps, and every gap is an educational opportunity. So again, teaching both of these groups, it's not only athletes, it's the parents, true, about nutrition, and it's all geared towards sports performance, nutrition, and recovery. Same thing with sleep, same thing with hydration, electrolytes, teaching about training, providing structured training programs, teaching about supplements, and then kind of just tying it all together with how can you fit this in within the way we've adapted our South Asian cultures and modern day lifestyles without losing our identity and our traditions and our background, because there's a way to bridge the gap and combine both together. It's just both sides have to be open and willing to compromise. And if that can be done, then that solves massive gaps for these athletes and can help continue to develop and support them to close that gap from where the elites are and where our athletes are, and really give them the opportunity to shine, to potentially continue to progress and perform at a higher level, and get to elite college programs and potentially even get to the highest level and play professionally. So the talent is real. The system just needs to be built, and that's what I'm working on with all these different groups, with Mokabla, with Brown Ballers, within Blueprint. So this has been really, really exciting to capture this data, interpret the data, and really explain why are we the way we are and what can we do about it, because I've got the solution.